Welcome, everybody. So first up is Dele Atanda. He's founder and CEO of metaMe. metaMe is the world's first self-sovereign AI and clean data operating system. Dele also chairs the Internet Foundation, an NGO dedicated to advancing digital human rights and the ethical use of data in commerce. Dele also heads up a blockchain media company that's introduced the world's first crypto comic series called metaNights. It's super cool. We saw it in Lisbon. metaNights aims to onboard people into this ownership economy through storytelling. He also wrote a best-selling book back in 2013 about Web3 called The Digitarian's Tsunami, Web3 and the Rise of the Neo-Citizen. I hope I got that right, Dele. Next up is Elana. Elana is an investor at Redbeard Ventures. On the sidelines, she runs a podcast called The Girls Table, which is aimed at women in Web3. Previously, she was at a unicorn called Flowcast, I hope I said that right too, which built financial infrastructure for accounting departments. And in the before times, she was at KPMG and Deloitte. Last but by no means least, we have award-winning journalist Jordan French, who is editor of Grit Daily News. So I've hung out with Jordan in Lisbon at Web Summit, and we collaborated with Grit Daily at Decentral in Miami very recently on a podcast. And I've only just discovered your extremely varied background. So this is actually Jordan's sixth company. His trajectory ranges from media to entrepreneurship to engineering to legal. And before that, he worked as a payload engineer for NASA's Mars Gravity Biosatellite program. So Jordan, over to you to moderate this.
Thank you. This will be a very technical conversation, and as Irene teed up, and we will be mostly discussing fluid thermodynamics. Are you ready for that? just kidding. But first, a big shout out to Doc Peace. It's not the first time she's introduced us before, and she's absolutely awesome. So big round of applause for her and contributing her awesome energy to everything. And we've had her, just for some context and foundation, with a collaboration with Link2 at South by Southwest, and I believe Consensus, but at least South by Southwest 2022, and it's coming up again for 2023 in Austin, Texas, where looks likely we'll collaborate with Link2 again. It sounds like a lot is slated for 2023 since we're all going to where Elana's been, which is Colombia. And thanks for that endorsement, Elana. But a lot of cool ground to cover, and I think Elana, I do want to start with you. There's an upcoming film. It's the sequel of Avatar, and I got some questions via email from our audience on this already, and they said, is that what you, and literally the summary of the question was, is that what's going to happen? Are we all going to be in a virtual meta world, metaverse at some point where all sorts of things can go wrong? What does life have ahead of us? So I'll start with that with you to open that. I know it's a really big question and partially unfair, and I promise we'll get to some other cool topics like valuation. But your take, Elana, given your experiences so far, on what these inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah, so I think we need to start off for the short term. Like, what is your digital identity? And basically, it's any personal data online that really could just be traced back to you. So think about kind of your digital persona today. It's all your photos online, it's your social media, it's your passwords in your bank account, it's anything you've ever searched online. And so you really need to think about all this information to then understand, like, what is that? If you took all that information, that's your personal persona. And then it's like, okay, how can you actually go ahead and verify that information and verify who you are? And that's where Web3 and the blockchain kind of go hand in hand. And then it's the next future of the internet, where it's going to be, okay, now you have this personal data. Maybe you cover yourself up with an avatar, decide that my name's no longer Elana online. I'm now trading female, and that's who I am. And then you're going to be able to wear VR headsets where it just feels more interactive. You're able to maybe see your friends. You're able to watch a movie together and be together. So in the short term, that's kind of where I see this next generation of the internet happening. I don't see us hooked up where we're laying down, our heads, our brains connected, and we're in the next Avatar, although it does sound really cool. And I do love the movie Avatar, and I'm excited for the sequel. But I think in the short term, we really just have to think about our digital identity and how we put ourselves out on the internet.
sounds like everyone in this audience who is thinking in that same way. What I just heard was that you need to wait, but that's coming. And just to give this a good analogy, and bear with me on this, Dele, because I said we're going to talk about fluid dynamics, and we are. It's a biology analogy. Much of what Elana described was what might be kind of like cellular structure, right? Like data points on the internet. What are social media data points, for example, and sort of give shape. Do you share that same view, though, Dele? Is that what we're looking at? There's a virtual you out there, or is it something different?
Yeah, I mean, actually, our comic saga, Meta Knights, is based on this premise that you have a digital self, and that, it's the kind of arc of the story is like it lives in this digital world, Digiterra, which you might kind of compare to a metaverse, and that it's being attacked by these cyber vampires, and that they suck people's data and they use that to enslave people across both realms. So it's kind of really playing to that. But, I mean, I think Elana's really correct in the sense that it is about your digital self. I was thinking about this title of this panel, and I thought me, myself, and my avatar. And it strikes me that actually really does capture what we're talking about. Because the problem with identity and data is that it gets a little bit, you have to deconstruct it. You have to deconstruct it to be able to use it in a pragmatic way. So, what often, and again, the title, identity versus identification. Quite often when people talk about identity, what we're really talking about is identification, the ability to identify someone. So I do think that is, when we talk about me, that's essentially it. But the reality is that identity is a very personal thing. It's kind of about how we see ourselves, our view of the world, our view of what we believe about ourselves, and what we want other people to believe about us. Identification, on the other hand, is how you separate one person from a group of people, right? So that's the kind of me space. The myself, I think, is exactly as Elana elaborated, it's your digital footprint. It's this summary of everything that you do online, which forms this digital self. And the problem is that this digital self that we have is really fragmented. It's fragmented across lots of different places. Some of it's in Facebook, some of it's in Google, some of it's in Spotify, some of it's in Amazon. And, it's all over the place, really. So there's a kind of movement now for people to be able to bring this self together into a coherent place that you have control over. People, technically, we call this self-sovereignty. But then my avatar is then really about content. It's really about this way that I present myself. And, certainly we're seeing this in the metaverse, but, we've seen it in Web 2. Our little images, our profile pictures effectively have been really crude avatars that are these representations of ourselves. Sometimes it's a photograph, sometimes it's a cat, sometimes it's, something else, whatnot. But I think that's a helpful way to think about this kind of space, your identity being how you are identified, yourself being your digital footprint, your photos, your memories, your experiences, your relationships, all the stuff Elana mentioned, and then your avatar being this way that, it's kind of a front, a way that you package all of that up and present yourself to the world.
There's so much to unpack there, Dele. But Elana, we'll pick up where you exactly left off. And Dele, we were listening, and he said the word identity, I think 5 times. The most common word in people's mind, though, that follows that is theft. And so in our minds, right, in this audience's mind, it does sound like, and Dele laid this foundation, this information's all over the place. He said, on some social channels, but also there's banking information that might also form the sort of the cellular structure that gives this avatar, so to speak, or virtual identity some shape. How can we protect ourselves from those leaks, from that fragmentation? Is there any, and I'll ask you a compound question, I'm aware of it, but is there even a set of standards? Should there be, Elana?
Yeah, so I think right now what we're seeing, at least in the Web3 space, because that's kind of my background, is more of those seed phrases. So it's like beforehand, you had a password, you were able, if you had trouble, your password didn't work, whatever the case may be, you could contact customer support, you talk to them, they reset your password, all is good with the world. But now we're actually seeing the seed phrases. So there is no longer customer support. You have 15 to 17 seed phrases, you write it down, and then you hope to God that you don't lose that sheet of paper or where you had it or forget your password. And so this next generation of kind of having that bank statements, the bank online, owning your wallet on the internet is kind of where I see this next phrase of the internet, where you actually own your information, you own your wallet, and there is no customer support, but at least then you could put it on a cold wallet, store it, so you actually hold this. So it's still utilizing the internet and utilizing this kind of next generation of the internet, but you're actually owning that information.
And I asked about, so we appreciate that. No, I think a lot of those in the blockchain and crypto community sort of raise or carry that flag of own your data, own your money, have things, not in a centralized institution, but perhaps a decentralized one. Still, though, there doesn't seem to be a standard. When I say that, just anecdotally, to Dele's point, there's information sort of all over the place. Some people are not just underbanked, but unbanked, for example. Is there any movement to sort of capture everything? And should we even want that, Elana?
I guess, what do you mean by that when you say like capture everything and really take the information? I'm just unsure that I understand exactly.
Well, I think the shared thesis that you and Dele have is that eventually, there's this shape that takes place from the cellular structure. That's all this data out there, and either you own it or you don't. But ideally you do, and eventually we'll be in these metaverse worlds in VR. Just to repeat back to what you said earlier, but we're not quite there yet. It sounds really scary, though, to the pedestrian kind of on the street. Everyone's sort of like working their day, right? They have enough to worry about. They have enough to concern themselves about and put food on the table and a roof over their heads, right? With a lot of other concerns. But it seems like there's this left field approach. All of the information on them out there, it could potentially be thieved. They might have a virtual identity. They're just discovering this from this talk. This whole time they're forming this virtual identity. There's potential holes there. To what extent should they be concerned?
Yeah, I'd say let's start with the easiest point first. It's like you as an individual should own your own data. You should not be searching online, going online, and you don't actually monetize off of that. The big players are the Google, the Facebook, the Snapchat, whatever kind of social platform you use, they're monetizing off of your information. So in the short term, you should be excited. Like there are actually browsers right now, like Brave's browser, where you could actually monetize off of that. So you could say, hey, I'm going to let you have my information, but I'm going to get that money that I'm sharing. So that's in the short term. So as an individual, you should be like, yes, let's go. Like I'm going to monetize off of my information.
We could just unpack that point. What you're saying is everyone stop Googling. Alphabet, which owns Google, is literally taking all of that search data, that search traffic, all this information on you and selling it without your permission. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. You don't monetize off it. You're giving it to the big corporations, which is great for them. But you as an individual who are spending hours a day on the internet should be actually getting some of that monetization benefit that all these big corporations are getting.
People still need to find information, though. So where should they go? The habits are very real. Of course, we must recognize that people Google everything all day. In fact, it's built into all of our devices, phones, anything else. What do those alternatives look like?
Yeah, there's something called Brave browser. And basically you just say, hey, you could have my information, you could have everything that I'm looking at, but I want to monetize off of that. So that's one specifically that I use. I know a lot of people use to actually be able to own their own data and then monetize off of it. But the next thing that I see and kind of affecting us too is if you've ever utilized a social platform, you have some followers on Instagram, on Twitter, you don't actually own those followers. One of those corporations, which we've actually seen a lot on TikTok, has actually taken your account and they've just deleted it. They're just like, sorry, you're off of our terms and conditions. You lose your thousands. Some big influencers have lost millions of followers and they have not owned it. And so this next generation of social media, we see you actually being able to own your own followers and then carry those followers on different social platforms. So like I have my followers on Twitter, but then I have to go ahead and get a different set of followers when I started on YouTube and a different set on Instagram, and they're all different social media platforms. But there's something like a company called Lens Protocol, which is actually letting you own your followers, own that information, being able to see information about all your followers, and then being able to carry them across different social platforms. So I think this is kind of that next generation of what we're going to be seeing us affecting us in the short term. And that's where I see us headed. So although some people might be like, okay, I don't want to go ahead and live in the next avatar of our universe, it's going to be the small things that we're going to see. It's going to be seeing you being able to own your digital identity, own your information, then also affecting us in the short term where we're able to actually monetize off of that.
And to frame this, Elana, it sounds like you're distinguishing between what you might, and you daily might describe as Web 3 versus Web 2, where Web 2 are these Googles and the TikToks. I'm going to use your specific examples just from search and from social media, where there's a Web 3 counterpart that's almost identical, that ideally should make it somewhat seamless to move from Web 2 platforms to Web 3, where you can monetize and own your data. Dele, your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working on an article around the web. I think the web is actually a bit of a problem. While I agree completely, Web3 is really predicated around this principle of ownership. I don't know, I think there are problems with the Web3 model, the Web3 ecosystem around this at the moment. I think one of the central problems, there are two problems, and one is more technical and one is more emotional. I think the technical problem is like Web3 Web3 is set up around ownership, but we don't actually have, if I can use the term primitives, I know that's kind of a bit of a technical term, but what I mean by that is building blocks. So if you think about public-private keys, cryptocurrencies, NFTs, these are kind of core Web3 primitives, but they're not really suitable for sharing property that isn't money, right? You know, they're basically designed, I mean, and even NFTs in a sense are like receipts for ownership or stuff, but they're not really fit for purpose for when it comes to managing things like identity, or when it comes to things like relationships and these complex things. So we need some more sophisticated primitives, or more capable, more appropriate, more focused primitives that are designed for these particular challenges. And we've been doing a lot of work around that. You know, I was saying, like, even something like identity, for example, like in our protocol, we've defined 6 identity states, right? Varying from being off-chain through to anonymous and identifiable. But so that's a technical problem that needs to be solved. And I think we're starting to address it now. And there are some standards, things like the W3C convention with decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. Some of these traverse Web 2 and Web 3. But actually, I think something you actually mentioned, Jordan, is actually a much more fundamental problem. And, you know, I've been trying to crack this area for a very long time. And it really does come down to the fact that when you really start talking about identity and data, it is scary. It scares people. It's like overwhelming. It's complex. It's, you know, and even self-sovereignty in that sense, it's like a burden. It's like, I mean, look at money, you know, how many people have self-custodial wallets? That's what we saw with FTX. That's the big nightmare that people, it's a lot of work for people to take self-custody in that regards. So this brings me back to this, me, myself, and my avatar. You know, yes, Elana is 1000% right. We do need to own our data. We do need to own our identity. But I think the way that we get people there is through something that's more accessible. And I think, you know, where my avatar becomes really important in that sense is because, think of it in a Web 2 context, my avatar is like a photo of me. You know, it's just a profile, it's a profile picture. It's not just though, because it's actually how I identify myself. And I think if we can, so I think the future actually, the way that we really start to effect this Web3 revolution that we talk about in terms of sovereignty and ownership is through media. I think, and particularly user-generated media that we create ourselves. But I think there's a relationship between media that we create and media that we interact with. And so really crypto media primitives, I see as a really exciting space that allows us to come into this foray, and that's really valuable across the spectrum. I mean, across the metaverse, Web 2 is really predicated on media, Facebook, Spotify, Netflix, Amazon, these are all media companies, even Google in many regards, with YouTube and the like, and I get search as information, but information, and that's where it gets interesting, information is media effectively, but people don't want to think about information as media in that sense. It's hard work. But if you think about, content that we play with, whether it's game assets or whether it's videos or whether it's films or songs or books or photographs that we take or, posts that we make or memes that we make, this is a much more accessible space, I think, for people generally.
It's certainly, and also again, a lot to unpack there, Dele, but we'll pull from one thread of the linen, which you described as some of the issues already with Web3 and how it's structured. A lot of the infrastructure, and we'll touch on this word primitives in just a moment. A lot of that structure is really just around money, and even the primitives, as you describe them, are aptly quite primitive, like NFTs mostly serve as a receipt, although they could do a lot more with smart contracts. But to be fair, let's inspect Web 2. Elana, it's much like audiences have this epiphany, right? Where we're all in this paradigm where we log into banking accounts with a username and a password. We all use fiat currencies largely, and we all really did this, that's for sure, not that long ago, and still do today. We'll log into social media profiles and whatever else, but that whole system itself is flawed. That's the epiphany that people come to. What constitutes, and let me lay some more foundation, Elana. Often people change because there's a recognition of a problem and potentially a solution for it. Are we at that precipice, Elana? I think you froze.
Looks like she's frozen, yeah.
Frozen. She's stunned by
trapped in the matrix.
We'll continue where you left off, Dele. And the moment she's able to reset or chime back in, let's drill down on the primitives. There's problems in Web3 already with perhaps what's being built, and let's just, for the sake of argument, concede that. But oxygen in the room or not, are the problems within and opportunities within Web 2 bigger that this is inevitable, that will change how we interact with our virtual selves? Or is it possible that we stay in this Web 2 world and live in parallel?
Yeah, look, I think these demarcations are more relevant to us in the industry than they are to the masses outside. The internet's the internet, the internet. For me, the internet and the web are kind of two distinctions. And I think the web is problematic. I think the web has actually been set up from the outset in a problematic way because, there's a whole history about this, about the first conference at CERN when Sir Tim introduced the HTML protocol. And it was basically, the model was always about making information freely available where people would where it would be paid for by advertising. And that model has just become compoundly flawed as we go through. And I think the issues are still in Web3. It is about ownership. Web3 does accord more ownership and it does drive more decentralization. But already you can see, and again, I hate to kind of, he whose name shall not be spoken, bring him up. But we see this with the exchanges. This is, and it's back to this whole thing about centralized services being built on decentralized technology. And that's important in some regards because people want the easy user experience. That's why everybody loves Coinbase, or the masses love Coinbase, even because it's an easy onboarding experience. People want that hand holding. And I do believe that you can achieve that in the decentralized world. But I think ultimately, though, solutions need to traverse both realms, Web 2 and Web 3. I really like, if you look at, we've approached this from looking at W3C's did and verifiable credential framework, because that's a really interesting one. It's something that works across Web 2 and Web 3, potentially. And what you can actually then create is a system where you have the security of Web 3, but the convenience of Web 2. So, imagine a world, for example, where you have a top level domain name like a Jordan.e, for example, right? And you can use that to sign into any service just by signing your wallet, right? No username, no password, and you're able to pull data, whether it's from Web 2 or Web 3, into your own wallet, and then utilize it, share it with parties that you want to, however you want to. That technology is here. We have the capability to do this now. It's just really how we assemble it and design it to achieve that. So I think ultimately the Web 2, Web 3 demarcation is going to move away, and probably the metaverse is probably going to accelerate this more than any other arena. And we will get to ownership of assets and ownership of data and ownership of identity, which is obviously the Web3 side of it. But to your point, I think a lot of that data already is in Web2. So we need to find a way to bring it from the legacy web, if you will, into the decentralized web as part of the solutioning.
And Elana, just to evolve this a bit more so that we're not necessarily answering the same exact question. There's one important anecdote that Dele brought up, and it was the example of Coinbase, which is a centralized system it's a centralized system on a decentralized in a decentralized paradigm, right? With cryptocurrencies all centralized though, and I think that's a really important point though to drill down on, and I'll turn it into a question, Elana. How important is it that consumers shake what look like bad habits of wanting to log into a centralized system, right? Like Coinbase looks like E-Trade, right? Or like a trade station or Fidelity account. They're so used to that. But what I'm hearing from Dele is those are probably bad habits carrying over into Web3 metaverse. We can use terminologies and distinguish or not. Is that a problem, Elana?
Yeah, so I think the way that things are structured right now, CeFi has been an on-ramp to DeFi. And what I mean by this is FTX pushed this back. It makes people really hesitant to put their money on a decentralized exchange. But what people don't realize is that was a centralized exchange. The Coinbase, the FTX, the BlockFi, all of these are centralized exchanges. You put your money on the platform, and then they were able, even though it's set in their terms and conditions of FTX, which kind of goes into more problems with the system, but basically they were able to loan your money out. And in return, they were promising these crazy returns. So they were saying, hey, you put your Ethereum on FTX, and then you go ahead and you stake that money, and in return, you get 10% yield. Well, the only way that they were able to give you that 10% or even higher yield is by actually loaning that money out in hopes that they'd be able to return a greater amount of money than what they initially promised to you. So these are all the problems with CeFi. And I think if there's anything we should take out of the phenomenon with FTX is that your money was not safe and that you did not own your money and they actually own your money. You just put it on there. And if everybody in the world came over and they wanted your money and they wanted to go take it off the exchange, then that would have caused a significant insolvency, which is basically what we saw and what came to light with FTX, although there were a lot of other issues that we could jump into. But I think after everything happened with FTX, what I did personally was I was like, even though Coinbase sounds like some of the safest platforms that they had, I took all my money off. I was like, you know what? I'm keeping it in a cold wallet. I'll have a little bit in my hot wallet. But really, I want to own my money. I don't want to, like, we're seeing it time and time again happen with these centralized exchanges. And I personally didn't want to see it happen with my own money and my own information that worked so hard to earn. So all in all, like, I believe I want to keep my money and I want to own my money. And that's something that I think came to light in this.
But just to repeat that back to you, you said earlier, though, that CFI is or centralized finance, for those who need the terms, centralized finance is an on-ramp into DeFi or decentralized finance. But it sounds like what you did is went from potentially CFI, an example of, at least you described Coinbase, which does fit within that centralized system. Almost literally, guys, these are all banks. They're just not regulated. They're like hedge funds that are unregulated, essentially is what they are. But either way, your move though next was to put it into cold storage. Is that what DeFi is? Is that what people should be doing, or is it something else?
Yeah, so I think in the past, like, think about, I got into crypto back in 2018, but I really started getting into the Web3 space about 2.5 years ago. And the easiest way to get into DeFi at the time was you open up a Coinbase, you buy some Ethereum with your credit card, and then you send it to the MetaMask, you send it to a cold wallet, wherever you want to hold it. But I think nowadays they make it really easy where you don't need that first step of, hey, I'm going to open up a Coinbase, I'm going to buy the crypto, and then I'm going to move it. And most people in that case would sometimes just hold it in their Coinbase because that's where they bought it. But now you could actually go on to some of these decentralized exchanges with the help of MoonPay and some of the other kind of on-ramp providers, and you could just buy crypto directly there. So I think it's coming to light with everything with FTX that you don't want to hold your money on these centralized exchanges. You don't need that on-ramp first off in the centralized exchanges, but you could go straight to the decentralized ones. And so I think 2.5 years ago, that was the easiest way. And some people felt like it was, in short, the safest way. But I think the mindset right now is changing.
Certainly, though, inspecting what these CFI companies, did, many of them have gone under. There's still some out there, though. There's still some out there. But is DeFi just holding these funds, or often cryptocurrency, in a cold wallet or hot wallet, or is it loaning it out yourself, where you're acting as that, hedge fund equivalent, that Coinbase? In other words, making money the same way Coinbase does. It's just that it's on your own watch.
Yeah, it's the latter. So like, it's on your watch, like you approve it, you decide where you want to loan your money out against, not just putting your money in. I mean, so many people lost hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars on FTX because they thought it was safe. They were just putting their money on it. Was a centralized exchange. They're like, okay. And then they became insolvent and they can't pay everybody back the money that they initially had on the platform. So I think at least if you're loaning out and you're approving of that and you know that that's what you're doing, then that's on you. And that's a risk that you take in any type of investment that you make, whether it's a stock that goes to zero or a startup investment. Like, these are ones that you approve of, but they're just holding your money and then become insolvent. And then you see them actually going bankrupt and going under. They can't even pay you back if you just had cash on hand on the platform. So I think there's a lot of kind of differences that you see in that regard.
Certainly, and Dele, hearing all this, it does appear or sound like, to use Elana's words, it sets back the industry. Certainly, CFI is an industry, but potentially infects others. What does appear like an additional concern, though, is something you articulated earlier broadly with Web3, but even within the space where money is concerned, and specifically that is. Not everyone's well rehearsed on, staking, for example, or earning interest equivalent, right? Like getting some yield on cryptocurrencies. Again, our, big mass audience out there is, in their mind, going to fall back on their old habits, which would be higher. If you can't go do the Fidelity route or have like a brokerage equivalent, you fall back onto consultants, onto advisors to tell you and help you stake or earn yield. Is that your prediction, Dele, or is it something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't think it's a blanket for everyone, right? And I think, in the same sense that just like money, yeah, I mean, it is money we're talking about in this specific context at the moment. People have various different levels of sophistication, financial sophistication as investors, as savers, as spenders, even in their regards. So I think that, the role that exchanges play, essentially when you leave your money in the bank, the same thing happens. The bank takes your money and spends it and invests it on various different activities and instruments to generate a return. That's kind of the business model. But the difference is that they're highly regulated, and the amount of leverage. And we've seen this again with the financial collapse of 2008, which gave birth to Bitcoin, oddly enough, because of the over leveraging of the assets the banks had. So I think ultimately there will be a degree of regulation that comes to these financial service providers around people, around, when they're storing people's money. Now, I do agree with Elana completely that the smarter thing to do is to take self-custody and to take self-responsibility. And, that's a tribe, if you will, within the cryptoverse and within the human verse, if you really kind of look at it at large, that is always going to be relatively small. Well, maybe not always, but certainly in the short term is quite small. And we want to grow that community of people who are informed, educated, self-sovereign, independent, etc. Right? We need to grow that community. But by the same token, there is a role for this technology, for this, this phenomena, for the masses as well. So I do think that there will, and whether they exist as CeFi or DeFi entities is again, it's not irrelevant because there is a meaningful technical distinction, but I think what ultimately matters is how safe is people's money in these systems. And I think regulators will ultimately have to step in to put a degree of regulation around some of the space. And some of the space needs to kind of have freedom to be something else. I think that that's an important thing for us to fight for, but some of it does need to have a degree of protection that we see in other kind of financial instruments.
Yeah, certainly. No, I'll go to Karim real quick. Karim, we still good on time? We have 5 minutes, or are we?
You have actually 5 minutes, but what I'd like to suggest is there's a Q&A that is a question from the audience. The incoming panelists, Greg Kidd and Ahmad Pradhan, and I'd like to bring them in as you transition out, and they have a lot to say because the next panel is about DeFi. So I want to make an introduction and transition then.
Well, we did it. We have a perfect segue there. I did see some questions come in. This is a wide-ranging talk, or it could be, and the key is to always add value. I can pepper you, Dele and Elana, with a few of them, so that we're roping back in avatars. But I'm going to bridge that real quick, and I'll give you this, Elana. A lot of this conversation still revolves around money, behaviors, and what we can expect, next. But I want to go back to the very beginning of the talk with you, Elana, where you just described a digital identity and what could eventually become, this sort of like shape-taking avatar. And what is the relationship between that and what we've really dominated the back half of this talk with, which is, sort of about the money element of it. Elana?
Yeah, I would say if you take anything away from this, it would be that ownership piece of it. So in the beginning, I talked about kind of owning your followers, owning your data, and then monetizing off of this information. Well, the same I'm talking about when I'm talking about decentralized finance. It's owning your own money. It's owning your information. It's having the ability to say where your funds go and what they do with it. So all in all, the whole thing about Web3 and crypto is first transparency, but then it's also that ownership piece of it. And the last thing, which goes hand in hand, is monetizing off of this and monetizing off of your information and what you decide to do with it.
And speaking of monetization and ownership, one of the questions that came in, I'll ask at least one of them. Where are you investing in the metaverse?
Yeah, we invest in kind of 5 different sectors in the Web3 crypto space. One would be DeFi. So we've mentioned that a lot, but decentralized finance. We invest a lot in companies that hit the tokenomics. I think tokenomics is going to be huge kind of in the near term. Then the companies are able to really nail their utility around their token. Some other parts are play to earn gaming. We didn't get a chance to talk about that today, but I think the interoperability between play to earn gaming is going to be huge in the next 14 to 24 months. We invest in NFTs, and when people hear that, they sometimes think of NFT projects as a whole, but I think we're going to see a lot of utility behind NFTs and people who are able to really nail this. And then last are the metaverse. I think it's really going to be an interactive way to talk, to play with your friends and with people around you. And so having that digital identity in there is going to be really important as well.
And fairly, Dele, same question to you. Again, this question came up when we were talking about DeFi, so I think it was specific, and Elena gave both a specific and broader answer. But same to you, Dele. Where are you investing in the metaverse?
I think Elana's completely absolutely right. For me, it's really about, as I say, back to these three primitives: identity, data, and content. And content in terms of crypto media. And I think data is the bridge between all of it. So the way we think about it is that data effectively is money, and it's actually, the reality is that data has become more valuable than money. That's the hidden secret as to why these platforms would rather give you the services for free, because they can never pay you as much for your data as they extract from it, right? Because your data is more valuable and it's non-rivalrous, it keeps generating more and more value. So I think that's the bridge between all of this in terms of monetary value is data. And Elana said it perfectly right. It's about how do you monetize that data? So that's something we're very focused on in terms of providing a way for people to monetize that data. But then the key around all of that then is all about identity. And I think that for me, the issue, people talk about you need to own your identity and, and all of this. That's true. But what's actually more important is to own your anonymity. Because, and the bizarre thing, and this is a real epiphany that I think I've had in the last couple of months, we often think about privacy from a social rights and civil rights and kind of, civil liberties perspective. But actually, there's a really commercial aspect to it as well. And that is that if you own your data and you are able to keep a moat around that data, i.e. keep it private, then it becomes more valuable because you are then in control of when it is monetized and how it is monetized. And so the more control you build around your data, the more valuable your data will become and the more value you'll be able to sort of extract from it. So that's sort of really our sort of key focus. How do you use identity to take ownership of your data, to protect your anonymity in terms of its use and in how you monetize it?
Evoking the spirit of Brittany Kaiser there, own your data. Thanks for sharing that, Dele. That's all the time that we have. I'm going to turn this back over to Santo Narani, Saint Narani, showering us with opportunities to go to Medellin, Colombia. If you missed from about an hour ago, he's offered up for those who are in the audience free tickets. If I get this right, correct me if I get anything wrong. Free tickets to GIC IRL in Medellin, Colombia, October 18 to 23rd, roughly, right around there.
The problem with you, Jordan, is your memory is sticky as flypaper. If you had mentioned, everyone would have forgotten about it.
Well, someone will benefit. Someone will benefit from us bringing that up. But that's all the time that I have. I'm Jordan French, Grit Daily News and Block Telegraph. We'll see you at South by, and enjoy the rest of GIC. I know you have some awesome panelists coming up. I've met Amit Pradhan before and had him on. Have been blessed to have him on stage. So you guys all have a great time with this next talk. A big round of applause again for Dele and for Elana for dropping their knowledge off here as part of GIC to open up as well. And thank you both.